Ladies and gentlemen, as usual, we are back like we never left the place. Week 6 of fantasy football, fourth and frames. I'm Rhett Manuel, and right next to me is my co-host, Drew Scott. Nate Markham not with us tonight. Had to get a little late shift in tonight at the dealership, so he's with us as always, though in spirit. And as usual, for week 6, we're going to hit you guys with our smash, pass, and stash players for week 6. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get it popping.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.
And guys, as usual, we want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. Me and Drew are here, as we are every week, just trying to give you the most actionable fantasy football content we can, just like we do every week and every day over at fantasyandframes.com, just like we do on our YouTube channel, where you cannot forget to like, subscribe, review, and do anything you can to catch anytime a new podcast or short form video drops. And of course, y'all know the home base, fantasyandframes.com, the latest in rankings, in articles, our takes, news, notes, and so much more. Drew Scott, talk to the people. We're in mourning right now because one of our favorites happened to hit the IR this week. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But besides that little blow to the heart that we're taking, buddy, how you feeling?
Yeah, besides that, everything's pretty good over this way. Just definitely thoughts and prayers, and for everybody that's down in Florida, hopefully you were able to get out. If not, hopefully you're safe where you are. But it's obviously at the forefront right now. There's a lot going on, some scary stuff out there. So hopefully you guys are all good. I know we try to kind of stay away from reality. This is kind of like a reality escape for those that choose to watch and hang out with us. But yeah, that's some scary stuff, man. So just thinking of you guys.
Yeah, thinking of everybody in Florida, and in particular, a former Fantasy and Frames family member who lives down there. We're hoping everything's okay with Gator J and all his family, and just anybody else who is living down there in the Florida area. I mean, this is a monster of a storm that blew up super quickly. And as someone who has lived this hurricane experience throughout his life, I've never, ever felt the wrath of anything like a Cat 4 or a Cat 5. So prayers with them as usual. Just hoping everything turns out well. And if not, then we're just going to pray that everybody's alive and well and is able to feel that blessing of being able to see that next day and start to rebuild everything. So, Drew, let's get into some news and notes. And as you put together this show sheet tonight, it seems like you just wanted to start off with a just nice little shot to my heart, buddy. Derek Carr, Saints quarterback, expected to miss multiple weeks with an oblique injury. News came out today that Spencer Rattler is going to get the start this Sunday against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Not sure how to approach the Spencer Rattler situation at all, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask you what I think the obvious question is. In your mind, does every Saints offensive player lose value? And if they don't, then who is somebody who at least maintains value, who maybe gains a little bit of value? Just give me your latest synopsis on what the Saints offense might look like.
Yeah, I think all the pass catchers definitely have to at least take a little bit of a hit just because we don't know what Spencer Rattler is going to bring. Like maybe he comes out and he starts balling, but it's not a guarantee by any means. And it's not that Derek Carr was lighting the world on fire, but he wasn't playing horrible either. So I think those guys got to take a little bit of a downtick. Now, Alvin Kamara, he could take a possible downtick just because the offense might not be as efficient as it was. So the scoring opportunities might not be there, but I think he's still going to get plenty of work. So I'm not overly concerned about him. And there's another guy on the Saints I still like pretty well this week. So we'll talk about him in a little bit later too. But I do think you have to pump everybody down a little bit.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. But also Spencer Rattler coming out in news conferences today, gassing up Chris Olave a little bit. So, some people are starting to think, do we see a Chris Olave spike this week? I don't know. As a Saints fan, I'm just going to tell you, I have no idea what to expect from this team this Sunday. I mean, it's been a few years since we've had somebody who was We had Drew Brees for so many years, and now it's just a pocket guy to the core. Then we had the Jameis Winston experience. There was some Andy Dalton in there, then some Derek Carr. It's been a while since we've had anyone who has some real potential scramble and escapability to go off script. So, I mean, this should be interesting, if nothing else. Speaking of guys who can go off script and have some escapability, New England Patriots made the announcement that Drake May is going to make his first career start this Sunday against the Houston Texans. Good defense, bad offense. Doesn't even matter, Drew.
Yeah, short term, I don't really think it does just because they have the Texans. But long term, I am more excited for the Patriots offense with Drake May behind there. I don't know if it's the right decision for the Patriots to bring him in at this point. But for fantasy purposes, it should make the offense better once he gets comfortable, which is going to take a little bit, and he's not going to get off to an easy start by any means with the Texans and their pass rush. So I don't think it matters for this week, but I think that we can be excited at least for one or two of the guys in the offense long term.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Moving into our first firing of the NFL football season from the head coaching ranks, the Jets fire Robert Saleh, and defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich is named the interim head coach. Fantasy wise, I mean, what really happens? I mean, it was hard to predict to begin with. Garrett Wilson came out, had 22 targets last year, and barely 100 yards receiving. So, I mean, this offense feels like it's a bit of a mess right now.
Yeah, I'm going to throw this up here real quick before we get into that. Robert, favorite New England wide receiver. I'll just say stay tuned until a little bit later. We're going to talk about our stash picks for the week. My stash pick for the week is a New England wide receiver. So just hang out with us if you have the time, or watch it back later. It'll be toward the end of the episode. But I'll lay out my case for who I think the wide receiver to get in New England is toward the end of the show. Yeah, my changes for the Jets offensive players have changed none whatsoever. Aaron Rodgers is still there. Nathaniel Hackett's still there. I don't. I mean, I don't really know what it really changes. Maybe they'll get like a 1-game spike just from like sometimes teams rally around the head coach gets fired. They rally around the interim coach. Maybe we see that, but I think it's going to be more of what we've seen on as far as the offensive side goes. I can't imagine Saleh had a ton to say whenever you got Rodgers in the building, Hackett in the building. I don't know how much of a of a role that Saleh had in the offense in the first place. So nothing really changes for me there.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, I don't know what Fourth and Frames did to the fantasy football gods, Drew. But this next one is just one that anyone who's watched this iteration of the show since last year with me, Drew, and Chris starting off, this was an OG A1 day one pick for both of us. Texans wide receiver Nico Collins, placed on the IR, will miss at least the next 4 weeks with a hamstring injury. First, Drew, offer your respects to the man with a moment of silence, because Nico Collins has unequivocally been our boy. Heads down, eyes closed. All right, we're good. Prayers up to the man. Speedy recovery for Nico so he can come back and continue crushing faces.
Please.
Talking about fantasy football moving forward, I mean, there is now a wide open spot in this Texans offense for a pass catcher. Who's the big winner? And second thing I want to get into is, do you think that Xavier Hutchinson with a very similar skill set to Nico Collins is worth a stash?
So I think Stephon Diggs is like a set it and forget it wide receiver 1 at this point now. Moving forward, Tank Dell, maybe there's some chances for him to get some more downfield reps, maybe get back to what he was doing a little bit last year. I think that both of those guys have to see a lift. And then whenever it becomes to Xavier Hutchinson, for me, it just really, do you think it's going to be him or Dalton Schultz, and it ends up being the third option in this offense? I think it's going to be Dalton Schultz. I think Hutchinson will be the guy on the field. Whenever Tank was out, it was Robert Woods, and then whenever Nico got hurt, it was Xavier Hutchinson. So I mean, he's going to be on the field in 3 receiver sets. He's going to be playing snaps in a good offense, so he's worth a stash. But I think the most likely outcome is he ends up being the 4th option in this passing offense in terms of the target distribution. So that's my guess anyway. But I think that Diggs and Tank are clear winners. But if you're one of those folks that thinks that Tank is still being bothered by the injury and he won't bounce back, then your sell window has now opened. So it really just depends on how you feel whenever it comes to Tank.
Yeah, Brandon Hallam comes through with this comment that the reason Diggs was brought in was for the times when Nico or Tank were injured, which is a very valid point. But Stephon Diggs has also come through and very quickly asserted himself into that offense. It has been a big part of what they're doing so far. So I think there is almost a situation where, he maybe gets a few more targets this week. The boss man, Jorge Edwards, saying, "What's good, fam?" Jorge, once again, congratulations.
Up,
yeah. Good to see you back in action in the chat tonight. I know that baby life is starting to rear its head with you, start to get some of those sleepless nights in. We're happy you spent a few minutes with us tonight over here, man.
Stay safe down there in Florida, man.
Yeah, for sure. One more note. Michael Pittman out multiple weeks with a back injury. I think we both know who the big winner is because he's already started to assert himself with 26 targets in 3 weeks. I'm just going to say it. You're going to elaborate on it, Drew. Josh Downs to the moon, baby. Let's go.
Yep. Since he played his first game in week 3, he's had the highest target share, the highest yards per route run, and first read target share on the Colts. So he's kind of already been asserting himself before the Pittman injury. So now in my mind, he's the clear-cut safest option in this Colts passing offense to start on a weekly basis. And I think that it makes Alec Pierce a little bit more interesting. AD Mitchell, the tape he's put out there so far has been a little disappointing, but maybe this gets him some more opportunities as well. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, the main guy that I'm excited about here is Josh Downs.
Yeah, and I think it's also really worth noticing, though, because one thing about Alec Pierce so far this season is that he has low-key been a pretty solid fantasy bet. He's wide receiver 22 so far this year per Player Profiler's numbers. Only 17 targets for 13 receptions for 368 yards, 446 air yards, and 3 touchdowns. So, yes, he's very boom or bust, but that being said, he's been very boom so far this year. So, like you said, gets a little bit more interesting. Maybe let's see what he can do whenever he's not flying deep down the seam and getting deep targets. But, he's been interesting so far this year, so we're going to see where that goes from there. Just like we want you to see what you can do over at Underdog, formerly known as Underdog Fantasy, because like we tell you every week, they are offering you free money. If you use the promo code FRAMES, you'll get a 100% match on your deposit up to 1,000 bones. Now, I don't have $1,000 to spend on fantasy on a weekly basis, but you know what? Somebody in the world does. So if you are that man, go ahead and don't forget to miss out on all the fun and all the action over at Underdog today. So let's get into our next segment, baby. That week 6 smash, pass, or stash plays. I've learned to kind of slow that down as the week is going on, so not have it mumble out of my mouth, Drew, because it kind of is a mouthful here and there. But we want to remind our listeners, like we do every week, what a smash, what a pass, and what a stash player looks like. A smash is a player that we believe is outside the top 20 wide receivers, outside the top 15 running backs, outside the top 8 tight ends, and outside the top 12 quarterbacks that is going to produce in a big way this week. A pass is a player that is inside the top 35 wide receivers, inside the top 20 RBs, inside the top 12 tight ends, and inside the top 20 quarterbacks. And a stash is a player that we like that is rostered in under 50% of sleeper leagues. So before we get that, Austin is in the chat and he has a question for us. Before we get into smash plays, because we're not going to mention him, let's just go ahead and answer Austin's question. Is Wan'Dale Robinson worth this flex spot?
Yeah, I think so. He's top 5 in the league in targets. I know he's not doing a ton with them. So I guess it really just depends on, are you in a full point PPR, half point PPR? But I think regardless, you're starting him. I've got him inside my top 35 receivers this week. And I don't hate the matchup against Cincinnati. So yeah, I think, and hopefully Malik Neighbors comes back. I think even if he does come back, you can still play him, but I don't, at least last I checked, Malik Neighbors still isn't practicing from the concussion. So, yeah, I think you can definitely flex Wan'Dale again this week.
Yeah, Wan'Dale, 47 targets in 5 games so far this year, 32 receptions, 2 receiving touchdowns, only 7.2 yards per reception, and actually more receiving yards than he has air yards, which is a rarity, but that just goes to show you what his usage is. Scampers, our boy, baby, what is cracking? We're happy to have you here tonight as usual. And getting into these smash plays, Drew, you're going straight for the boss man's heart tonight, speaking his love language, which is the Washington Commanders. And go ahead and tell us why Terry McLaurin is a smash play against the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, it was a slow start for Terry, but he was a high end wide receiver 2 in weeks 3 and 4, and he was the wide receiver 28 last week after 4 receptions on 8 targets. And the only reason that he wasn't higher last week was because he just missed connecting on a nice touchdown pass from Jaden Daniels that he probably catches 9 times out of 10. And so the week could have been much bigger than wide receiver 28 last week. But from weeks 3 through 5, we take out the slow start, weeks 1 and 2. From weeks 3 through 5, McLaurin has averaged 88 receiving yards a game. He has a 3.18 yards per route run, which is 6th among all pass catchers that have run at least 60 routes in those 3 weeks. 17.6 yards per reception, which is 7th among receivers, and a 0.145 first downs per route run, which was 5th among receivers. And he also has a 34.5% first read share over the last 3 weeks, which is 10th among pass catchers. So it's a long way of saying that Terry McLaurin has been balling these last 3 weeks, and it doesn't look like we have to make plans for Terry to slow down anytime soon because he's playing Baltimore this week. The defense has given up the 2nd highest amount of schedule-adjusted fantasy points to the receiver position through the first 5 weeks, and they're also giving up the 5th highest points per game to wide receivers that line up out wide on the season, which is where McLaurin has lined up over 80% of his snaps this year. So I'm not saying he's going to have a Jamar Chase type of week, but Chase did just fine lining up out wide against the Ravens this past week. So you've got a receiver that's playing extremely well. He's got one of the best matchups that fantasy receivers can ask for through five weeks. That feels like a smash play to me. The week 6 Fantasy Pros ECR had McLaurin just outside the top 20 wide receiver 21. I've got him back up in that high-end wide receiver 2 territory this week.
Yeah, and I mean, those are all solid takes because, I mean, you were looking at the Commanders. First off, I don't think anybody saw a 4-1 start. I don't think anyone saw Jaden Daniels becoming who he is quite as quickly as he has been. I was looking at the ECRs earlier today. They have him up at quarterback 2 this week for fantasy football. Now, if you had Jaden Daniels as quarterback 2 5 weeks into the season on your bingo card, God bless you. You know this game much better than I do. But speaking of knowing this game, Scampers is a little bit upset with you for your absolutely unnecessary destruction in the Listener League matchup, Drew. I mean, I need you to apologize to him right now for what you did to him.
I did. Wait, was it Scampers that I beat this past week for real?
I guess so.
It was, man. Damn, that feels bad, Scampers. I'm sorry. I know it has to suck losing to me with how bad my team is. But guess what, Rhett? You're up next. I got you this week. So my redemption tour must go on. So I'm on the way to 2 and 4 after this week. So yeah, I have fun at the bottom. I won't be seeing you there. There's no way this shit talk could ever blow up in my face. So yeah, Scampers had a bad week, and he caught me on the only good week I've had this entire season so far in that league. So I'm sorry, Scampers, you did not deserve that. But yeah, the show goes on. Rhett, you're up next.
Yeah, speaking of the show going on, let's talk about my smash play for this week. Man, let's talk some Darnell Mooney because, like,
yeah,
what a start he is off to this season. What a week he had last week. And here's the thing, is like a lot of us are going to look at that wide receiver 3 finish last week overall, where he had 31.3 fantasy points and 16 targets and 9 receptions and 2 touchdowns and 105 receiving yards and 192 air yards. And you're thinking, man, that's probably as good as it's gotten. And it has been. But in 2 other weeks this season, my man has had a 7-target game with a touchdown. He's had an 8-target, 8-reception game for a touchdown. Wide receiver 18 and 27 finishes. Against Marshawn Lattimore, who, as we know, one of the better cornerbacks in the league. He finished as wide receiver 49, so he was flex worthy. So Darnell Mooney has been really solid so far this season, and he heads into this week as the ECR wide receiver 26, and he's actually wide receiver 20 in fantasy points per game so far this year at 15 points per game, round the nose, averaging 8 targets a game. And here's the thing that I love, and I love when receivers are on the field. Darnell Mooney has a 95.2% snap share for the season. That is second at his position. He's 9th in air yards. He's 7th in deep targets. He's 9th in unrealized air yards. He has a 24% target share. He has 35.1% of the Falcons' fantasy points at the position. Long story short, Drake London is starting to emerge. But Darnell Mooney has also emerged as a true number 2 in this offense.
Yeah.
And he's playing the Carolina Panthers this week, who are 21st in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. Atlanta seems to know who it wants to be, and Darnell Mooney is a big part of who they want to be. I was going to talk about another one of their players a little bit later and use this number. But the Atlanta Falcons, despite having Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, I'm sorry for coming for your heart right now, but they've thrown the ball nearly 65 or nearly 64% of the time this year, Drew. So
yeah, well,
play fast.
Was it like 80% the last game? Like, I don't think it was literally that much, but like, man, they threw the ball so much last week too.
Close enough. So look, they throw the ball, they play fast.
Yeah.
They seem to want to consolidate those targets into a few guys. And if they're throwing it that much, I mean, if you're throwing it 40 times a game, then even your fourth option can end up with 6 targets a game. So, I mean, it is a healthy offense for pass catchers right now. And with Darnell Mooney playing the Carolina Panthers this week, I think we're in another spot where we can potentially see him have another very solid week where he outperforms that wide receiver 26 and has another wide receiver 2 finish.
I like it, man. Yeah, Darnell Mooney is one of them guys that, like, you know, hindsight's 2020, but looking back and as far as draft day values, like it should have been more obvious that, like, hey, what if we're wrong about one of Drake London or Kyle Pitts? Like, Darnell Mooney has played well before. Whenever he had decent quarterback play, he's going to have good quarterback play. He's just a good receiver. Like, we know that. We know that the guy can ball, and it's like, why weren't we taking? I'm speaking for me solely here. Why was I not taking more shots on Darnell Mooney just in case I was wrong about Kyle Pitts or Drake London? And the dude's been killing it, man. It's been a lot of fun to watch him ball out. It sucks because it's, you know, kind of came without Drake London or Kyle Pitts, mostly Kyle Pitts getting the production. But yeah, it's been cool. But while we're talking about the Falcons or the Falcons offense, just fun little note: the Falcons have the 3rd easiest schedule for running backs for the rest of the season. So yeah, I'm not giving up on you, Bijan. Buy low. Matter of fact, you should go buy low on Bijan unless you're in a league with me because you're screwed. But anywhere else, but Bijan's had a couple tough matchups to start the year. Things are going to get better.
Yeah, I agree with that as well too. And when we're talking about guys who are ahead of the curve on Darnell Mooney, we did a show this offseason where Jim Coventry was on with us, and he was actually banging that Darnell Mooney drum in that offseason episode.
Smart cat,
so it's
man.
like
Doesn't surprise me.
Coventry, one of the best in the business, man. So one of our many guests that have just kind of come on and just absolutely brought the heat if you want to go and look at past episodes with us. But we're not living in the past. We're living in the present right now. We're in week 6, and we have a second smash play we need to talk about. Drew, we talked about love languages with Jorge earlier today. It just seems like you're trying to win brownie points with everyone around you tonight. So go ahead and talk about a guy that heading into the season, full disclosure, I was dead wrong on Rashid Shaheed, and I'm so happy that I was.
Yeah, I would call me the Pander Man tonight. But this is our 5th week running this smash pass stash segment, and this is already the 2nd time that I've picked him as my smash play. He's consistently being ranked outside of the top 24 receivers, and it's getting harder and harder to explain why. He did have the dud in week 3 against Philly, but outside of that, he's had 3 weeks inside the top 15 and another week at wide receiver 25. I don't know if now is the time for it, but we might also have to have a discussion eventually about who the Saints wide receiver 1 actually is if things keep up, because through 5 weeks, Shaheed is number 1 among all Saints pass catchers in targets per route run, receiving yards a game, yards per route run, yards after the catch per reception, and first read percentage. Now, maybe that changes because Spencer Rattler came out and said, if Chris Olave's on the field, I'm throwing him the ball. You know, it's that simple. Maybe that flips. I don't know. That's really the one question mark with this call. The one concern is that the rookie Spencer Rattler, he's making his first career start in place of Derek Carr while Carr deals with his injury. And while, you know, I said earlier, like Derek Carr, the first couple weeks was great. And since then he's been okay, you know, but we'll see what happens with Spencer Rattler at quarterback. I like the possibility of them being able to draw up some easy plays for Shaheed, you know, just letting him do his thing, yards after the catch. I mean, he's averaging 5 yards after the catch per reception this season. Like, it's just what the guy does. So draw up some easy plays for Shaheed, get the ball in his hands so that you don't have to ask Spencer Rattler to do too much. In my mind, that makes a ton of sense. We'll see if it plays out in the game, but I get the concerns with the rookie quarterback. But with how good Shaheed's been and how good the matchup is, I still think he's a smash play this week. Fantasy Pros ECR has Shaheed down, buried again. I don't want to say buried, but they've got him down in the rankings again this week. I've got him up in that wide receiver 2 range. So I think Shaheed's a good start this week.
I think my favorite Shaheed stat happens to be this. I'm looking at it right now. His win rate against man is very solid. Number 23 in the league at 42.6%. His win rate against zone is 61.5%.
Yeah.
Which for a guy who we think just gets up the field and just runs the streak route, I mean, it's pretty impressive that he seems to kind of, be able to find that soft spot in the zone and just kind of win. Yeah, got a little bit of nuance to his game. So Rashid Shaheed, I mean, like I said, I'm so happy that I was wrong on that because he's been one of the few bright spots in the Saints offense over the past 3 weeks. Because, I mean, after those first 2 weeks, which were seemingly now in hindsight very much fool's gold, and y'all shouldn't watch the week 3 episode where I was just bragging and just going off because that looks real stupid in hindsight. But, I mean, hey, Shaheed has been great so far, and we hope that we can get back on track this week as a Saints fan. But one guy who is finally starting to find the track himself. I called it on Twitter a couple weeks ago. I thought a Caleb Williams breakout was coming. It came a week late, but we got it last week against Jacksonville where he had that 300-yard game, 10.5 yards per attempt, also the 30 rushing yards. Man, we're on Caleb Williams Island. And like they once said on the Wolf of Wall Street, I'm not effing leaving.
I'm not leaving.
I'm leaving.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah. Caleb's getting comfortable in this offense, and to make things better, he's seemingly in the middle of the 3-week stretch of every season where DeAndre Swift is balling. So that's going to help his game a little bit. And he's also playing the worst defense in schedule adjusted fantasy points in the league in the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. So when I was making my rankings this morning or making my smash picks, Caleb was the quarterback 13, so he was right on the line. This isn't one of those Raheem Mostert situations where he was at like running back 40, then somebody got hurt and he got pushed up to running back 5, and I went with it last week. No, they've only pushed him up to quarterback 12, so technically he's outside of the parameters for what we do here. But, I mean, Caleb, man, 2 touchdowns last week, and probably the biggest thing, 2 weeks ago he threw the ball 50 times, had 300 yards, had 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. Just efficient and clean last week in that 40-10 win. 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, like we said, 10.5 yards per attempt. Tucked him whenever he needed to, 5 carries, 34 yards. I mean, it's happening. Dave Kluge, noted Bears fan, great fantasy football follower, said it last week. He feels like he's starting to get comfortable. And
yeah, it's fair.
And if he's comfortable, if he's starting to become that guy that people thought he could be at the number 1 overall pick, Chicago is really starting to build something here. And if Caleb continues to build on this momentum, I'm just going to go out on a limb. You can clip it if you want to right now. But there's a very good chance that toward the end of this fantasy football season, Caleb Williams could be knocking on the door of being ranked consistently as a top-tier fantasy football quarterback 1 on a weekly basis.
Yeah, just fun stat. If you go by schedule adjusted fantasy points through the first 5 weeks, the Bears quarterbacks, aka Caleb Williams, have the second easiest strength of schedule for the rest of the year. They only have 1 matchup with a defense that's in the top 10 against fantasy quarterbacks, and everything else is top 16 or better, most of which being in the 20s or 30s. So Caleb Williams, the Bears pass catchers, have a beautiful stretch to start the year. And while we're talking about the Bears, I'll just say this. DeAndre Swift has had like the nuts rollout for the last few weeks whenever it comes to schedule. Like the last 3 weeks, he's played the 29th, 24th, and 32nd best defense for fantasy running backs. And then he gets Jacksonville, who's 26th this week. And then they have their bye week, another good matchup against Washington. But then after that, it gets a lot tougher. From weeks 12 to week 16, 4 of their 5 games are against Minnesota or Detroit, both of which are in the top 3 in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points giving up to the wide receiver position through 5 weeks. So to me, DeAndre Swift is the easiest sell high. Maybe you want to wait after this week, let him do his thing against Jacksonville. If you have confidence he's going to have a good week, I think he will. He goes into their bye week at that point, even though there's a good matchup against Washington waiting. At that point, I'm selling DeAndre Swift, and I'm using that matchup coming out of the bye week against Washington just as like a selling point added on to what I think he's going to put together a 1 month stretch now of really good football, and I think you can sell him high on that. So, yeah, it has nothing to do with your call, which of Caleb Williams, which I like a ton, and I'm all aboard the Caleb Williams train. I think he's a top 12 quarterback rest of season, and I think that DeAndre Swift, I think the sell high moment is coming.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. So those are our smash players. To recap, I picked Darnell Mooney and Caleb Williams. Drew picked Terry McLaurin and Rashid Shaheed. Going into our past players, Drew, the guy you picked right now has been red hot over the past few weeks. Like an unbelievable stretch. But that may be coming to an end this week, in your opinion. Chuba Hubbard has been a top 5 fantasy running back over the past 3 weeks. Why is it ending now?
Yeah, he's been awesome to the point that I'm not as confident that Jonathan Brooks is going to be walking into a workhorse role once he's healthy and fully ready into the offense. Like Jonathan Brooks is a my guy, and that part of that was that once he was fully ramped up and ready to go, he was going to be the guy. And Chuba doesn't seem like he really cares about all of that. The dude's been a top 10 fantasy running back for 3 straight weeks now, and he's had at least 13 rushing attempts and 4 targets. So we're talking about 17 opportunities per game at a minimum for the last week. And now some fool on this screen is going to tell you guys to pass on someone that's been handling those 17 opportunities a game the last few weeks. And he's been playing somewhere between 55 to 65 snaps. In the majority of those games as well. But yeah, that's what I'm here to do. Last week, I told you to pass on both Tampa running backs with the same matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, and they both ended up being outside of the top 30 at running back last week. Now, one thing that Chuba has going for him that those running backs don't is that Chuba isn't seeing near the split for touches that Rashad White and Bucky Irving over at Tampa are seeing. Last week for the Panthers, Miles Sanders had 2 carries and 3 targets. So other than 5 opportunities, every other opportunity was a Chuba. So the volume should be there. But the downside is that the Falcons' run defense has been great this year. They've went up against solid rushing offenses like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, New Orleans, and then most recently Tampa. And they're still, after all that, the 5th toughest matchup for fantasy running backs on the year. So we saw the Panthers offense come back down to earth last week a little bit, and Chuba was still solid. But if this offense isn't as efficient as it was the first couple Andy Dalton starts, and the scoring opportunities might not be there, and now Chuba, he's found the end zone each of the last 3 weeks, either on the ground or through the air, and now he's got to play this tough matchup against Atlanta. With the injuries that everyone's dealing with, the fact that Jonathan Brooks hasn't even been activated yet, I don't think you can afford to set Chuba this week. I'm not telling you to set him. He's still a borderline top 24 running back for me, but I would just temper expectations. I don't think you're going to get the top 5, top 10 running back this week that you've got in the last 3 weeks.
And that's a shame for me because I've been riding that Chuba train in one of these leagues that I'm in, one of these salary cap leagues. It's been a great last 3 weeks for me, especially after an 0-4 start. I've been able to pull out these weeks to wins the past couple weeks, but nobody cares about my fantasy league, so I don't know why I'm talking about it. But I'm just saying that he's been real solid, and I'm living proof of that. Another guy who's been really solid pretty much all season that I'm kind of tapering expectations on this week is James Cook against the Jets. Let's call a spade first. Yes, James Cook has been really good this season. Yes, James Cook has pretty much had that backfield to himself in terms of production. But guys, we talked about it at the top of the show. There's always seems to be a 1 week win one for the Gipper sort of bump that happens when a team fires a coach. And James Cook is walking directly into the 1 week bump against a good defense that has been the 8th best against the running back position and allowing only 16.5 fantasy points per game all year in the New York Jets. So first off, he is in a tough matchup. That goes without saying. Yeah. And when you're playing a good defense and it sets up the way it does, I mean, can we talk honestly and say that this Buffalo offense, this Buffalo passing offense in particular, hasn't really been super impressive so far. Drew, do you agree with that assessment?
Kind of, sort of. Not they're not what I expected, but they've looked okay. I think they're all right.
I mean, it's an average offense. I don't think there's anybody in that passing offense that really strikes fear into you. I think
No.
they've done a good job spreading the ball. I think Khalil Shakir has been pretty good. I think Dalton Kincaid has underachieved a little bit. I think Keon Coleman has shown flashes where he can be really good as the year goes on. But for the most part, it's kind of just been Josh Allen
and James Cook.
Josh Allen, James Cook is what this offense has been. So there's got to be a point where people are kind of going to start keying in on this running game because we know Joe Brady likes to run the ball at about a 50% pace, 50% clip. So it's also a Jets defense that has been top 10 against every offensive position so far in fantasy football this season. So they've given up less than 20 fantasy points to running backs in each game over the past month, which means people are not producing against the New York Jets defense right now. Yeah. It's just, and it's also a good unit that did a great job, despite the 23-17 loss against all positions against the undefeated Minnesota Vikings last week. They ended the big Sam Darnold run. Justin Jefferson wasn't himself. The running game wasn't really there either. The Minnesota Vikings just kind of rode that Brian Flores defensive unit to that win last week. So there's something here with this New York Jets defense for sure. Yeah, and I think with, despite the fact that their offense hasn't been very good, they still find themselves with a not great record, but they've been competitive all season long, and it has a lot to do with that defense.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. That Jets defense is a nightmare right now, and that was what made the Robert Saleh. I understood the Robert Saleh firing, but like he's a defensive guy, and the defense has always performed well. The last several years, and the offense was falling short. But hey, somebody has to get sacrificed. I understood why it was Saleh, but yeah, James Cook, he might not even play this week, right? So, like, if he,
I'm so glad you said that because look.
That's I on my mama. I did not see his comment down in the comments, and I was literally about to ask you the same thing. Do we we're already concerned about the matchup if it's James Cook? Do we care at all about Ty Johnson or Ray Davis if James Cook doesn't play? Because there's a realistic shot James Cook doesn't even play this week.
Yeah, and if that's the case, I'm not really sure we are snagging either one of Ty Johnson or Ray Davis. I think it's a stay away situation. I just think that this is one of those situations where if we're looking at the game plan, this has to be the week where somebody emerges in that Buffalo passing offense, right?
It was, and it's interesting. So I'll say this real quick: if there's no James Cook, I prefer Ray Davis still over Ty Johnson. That's just where I'm at. But we'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, I mean, Khalil Shakir, he missed last week with an injury. I don't know if he's practicing yet this week, but I mean, he's been kind of, in my mind, he's been the best, most consistent pass catcher for the Bills offense. So, but if there's no James Cook and there's no Khalil Shakir, then at that point, like, you have to think Dalton Kincaid hopefully gets a bump. Maybe both tight ends, like maybe it's a weird Dawson Knox week, maybe it's Keon Coleman. Like, it's hard to know, honestly. Outside of James Cook and Josh Allen, there's really been no rhyme or reason to who you can trust as far as Buffalo goes. So it should be interesting. But like, in my mind, to me, it makes sense. Like, this has to be a Dalton Kincaid thing, but I don't know. I really don't.
And it's also one of those things where you're like, man, you're not seeing Keon Coleman get the targets, but last week he gets a 49-yard touchdown catch, and it's not a deep target. It's a catch and run situation where he catches the ball and he gets up the sideline and he scores a touchdown in that way. So, like, God, it feels like every week we're just seeing flashes from that guy where, the scouting report goes, oh, he can't separate this, that, and everything else. Well, I'm still seeing him despite the fact that he, quote, can't separate. I mean, he had the very noted drop on Monday Night Football where he dropped the touchdown pass. And then he comes back and he gets 3 more catches, 51 yards after that. So if he catches the 45-yard reception that he drops right there, I mean, we're already talking about the Keon Coleman breakout game having happened 2 weeks ago. So, I mean, this Buffalo passing offense, don't know where it goes right now. All I know is that it is only thing we know is that we know nothing with that at that point outside of Josh Allen.
So looking at the last 3 weeks, Khalil Shakir was number 1 in yards and yards per game. Keon Coleman wasn't far behind him. Khalil Shakir was number 1 in yards per route run. Keon Coleman wasn't far behind him. Looking at end zone targets, it was Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman, and then one Curtis Samuel target over the last 3 weeks. First read percentage, it was Khalil Shakir. And then Keon Coleman, Dalton Kincaid were really close there. Matt Collins was also involved. Like, it's going to be a mismatch of stuff with, if there is no James Cook and no Khalil Shakir. I'm confident. I'm saying all that to say that if Khalil Shakir is there, if he's active, I'm confident in starting him. Outside of that, there's you're starting Dalton Kincaid, like, as far as tight ends go, with how they're underproducing and the options that are limited. Like, you're starting Dalton Kincaid at tight end if you drafted him. But outside of those two guys, I really don't know what to do with that offense.
Yeah, that's a great point. So moving into and staying in the AFC East, Drew.
Oh yeah,
we already kind of mentioned New England Patriots in passing. Are we calling time of death on Ramondre Stevenson against the Texans?
Just for this week. I know we all heard that Ramondre wouldn't start the game last week, all for him to end up playing almost 50% of the snaps. He was the running back 4 on the week. And I mean, to the coaching staff's credit, they said he wouldn't start. They didn't say he wouldn't play. They just said he wasn't going to start. And so, that worked out. But now on a week when you would think all things were going to be trending up, like he just had this top 5 week. The rookie Drake May, he's in, like, hey, all signs up for Ramondre Stevenson, but not so fast, my friend. Drake May, he's going to make his rookie debut, which is exciting. And while long-term, I think that will be great for the offense, I'm still expecting the Pats offense to not look that great, especially against this Houston defense. The playing the game script prediction game can be a dangerous one, but I'm expecting Houston to handle this game and New England to spend the majority of the time in catch-up mode. And that could work out well for Stevenson because he is a solid pass catcher and he's seen the majority of the work out of the backfield over Antonio Gibson in that category. But whenever it comes to running the ball, the Texans have been the 6th toughest matchup for fantasy running backs on the ground, and I don't expect Stevenson to see much success in that area. So I know the running back 4 finish last week was exciting for those of you that still start him despite the he won't start thing. But I don't think that this is the matchup to be excited about. So similar to Chuba, like, I understand if you need to start him based on the limited number of options and things like that. But I would temper expectations. I wouldn't expect a strong week for Ramondre this week.
Yeah. And I mean, moving into just what that looks like right now, I mean, I'm with you on just the fact that the New England Patriots, fresh quarterback this week, breaking it in. I'm just not sure what the heck to expect at all in that situation. And the same goes for my pass player right here, because I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to lead with the question that has been in the back of my mind for the better part of a year now.
All right.
Trevor Lawrence got the bag.
Yeah.
Number one, first question, was the bag premature? And number two, when did we start calling Trevor Lawrence a potential bust? Because we're in year 4 now at this point, correct?
Yeah.
And so far here in year 4, through 5 games, his completion percentage is the same as it was in his rookie year, 59.6%. He's averaging 7.1 yards per attempt, which is on par with the second and third years in the league. He has 6 touchdown passes. He is currently quarterback 23 in fantasy points per game so far this year at 14.4 points per game. He's only 14th in attempts. He is second in deep ball attempts. They're playing fast, but they're playing in a very terrible game script throughout the year. And he's not getting protected very well either at 82%. That is 26th in the league. Chris said we could call him a bust after I trade all my shares.
Just
Chris,
hold on. He's sending him home.
Just hold on, baby. Just hold on. We're coming home.
I'm glad you picked up on that.
Trevor Lawrence is coming into this week as the ECR quarterback 20. Guys, for the person that we thought was going to be called, was called the next great quarterback prospect.
Yeah, that's the problem.
That's the problem, is that he came in with a lot of hype And now that it's year 4, we've seen great prospects kind of start to flash by this time. I mean, we saw Andrew Luck in the MVP conversation by this time, despite him having a very short career. I mean, he's been extremely inefficient all season. He's kind of been bailed out by guys like Brian Thomas Jr. at times. I mean, and it doesn't get easier this week playing the Chicago Bears, who have been the second best defense against quarterbacks in schedule adjusted fantasy points. So I'm not sure where it happens for Trevor Lawrence. I don't think it is this week. And the thing is with this offense is that I like a lot of pieces of this Jacksonville offense. I'm a big Brian Thomas Jr. fan. I've always been a Christian Kirk guy. I think Evan Ingram coming off of the 150 target season, having some injury issues. When he comes back in this tight end hellscape, there can be some value there. Brenton Strange has caught a couple touchdown passes. Tank Bigsby is flashing. Travis Etienne has been, but we've seen him produce at a high rate in the past. So there are a lot of things to like about this Jacksonville offense, but the question has to become at some point, if it's not working like it should, does the problem become a Trevor Lawrence problem? That's not something I'm sure we can answer. But this week is just another tough spot for him where I just don't see where he produces at a high level.
Yeah, I think with Trevor Lawrence, for me, like I kind of gave him a pass his rookie year because like any rookie quarterback would have been lucky to see any kind of success under the shit show that Urban Meyer was running. So like that is out of my mind. And then I even still think like honestly, I think that the offensive side of the game has somewhat passed Doug Peterson by. Like I think they're a little too old school in Jacksonville, even with Doug Peterson. I don't think it's Urban Meyer bad, but I think the issue is calling Trevor Lawrence like a generational prospect and stuff like that, where like realistically, it looks like he's probably more of like a Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins trajectory, which is perfectly fine in the NFL. Like you like that if you have the right person calling the shots. But it's not what the Jags thought they were getting whenever they drafted him first overall. But I think that realistically, that's probably where he lands. But I don't think he's been in an ideal offensive play calling situation. Hardly at all in his career. So I think it's partly that and partly him underperforming as well. But yeah, to your point, where we're talking about passing on him as a top 20 quarterback option in fantasy, which is wild to think about. So, and I agree with you. I don't have any issue with the call. The matchup's tough. He hasn't been playing well. I don't really blame you, but it's wild that that's where we're here. But that's kind of where I'm at with Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, and Chris calling him a generational journeyman, which is
yikes. That's a big yikes.
Big yikes on Batistell's part. We love you anyway, buddy.
It's a big yikes on Trevor Lawrence's part that's where we're at. Like, not even what Chris is saying, but just like the fact that that's how we're looking at Trevor Lawrence now. Like, that's a big yikes, man, because that's definitely not what was advertised at Clemson.
Right. So, going over our past players one more time, Drew gave us Chuba Hubbard and Ramondre Stevenson, and I went with James Cook and Trevor Lawrence. And now for our stash players, Drew, you teased it earlier. A big quarterback change coming in New England. There is one guy that you are higher on than the rest of them. Give us why Jalen Polk, who is currently rostered in 18% of sleeper leagues as of yesterday, October 8th, why he's your guy right now that you feel like is going to be the guy going forward.
Yeah, it's still 18% as of today as well, which is surprising. But yeah, pulling Robert's question up here from earlier, yeah, it is Polk. It is Jalen Polk. That's my favorite stash. I just talked about how that while it might not be good in the short term, that I do like Drake May starting for the Pats offense long term, and it's looking like rookie receiver Jalen Polk is getting more integrated into the offense just in the right time. So after not topping 60% of the snaps the first 3 weeks of the year, the last 2 weeks, Polk has played 83% and 100% of the snaps this last week. So it's hard to get any meaningful data out of the 2-week sample because Polk only saw 4 receptions on 13 targets, which is a bad number. But the hope is that going from Jacoby Beef Brisket to Drake May is that you will improve the quality of the targets that Polk is seeing. And he's first on the team in route percentage and in first read target share over the last 2 weeks. So he's on the field and they're drawing up plays for him over the last 2 weeks that's kind of been the trend in the offense. So between the different pass catching options on New England, I think that Polk is my bet on who will be the fantasy receiver you want on this team for the rest of the year. But I am still a Pop Douglas guy as well. But I think Jalen Polk will be the more frequently targeted guy for the Pats with Drake May taking over.
Yeah, it's not a bad call at all, especially considering, you've got these rookies coming in. They help each other out. I mean, you're going to have a guy who's probably not going to progress those routes as quickly. Jalen Polk being a guy who might go early read, first read percentage might jump up there for him. As for me and my stash that I'm looking at, apparently, Drew, my thing right now is just secondary pass catchers in the Atlanta offense, because I'm looking at Ray McCloud, who is rostered in 10% of sleeper leagues. As of today, October 9th, we talked about it earlier. Atlanta is calling pass plays 63.5% of the time so far this year. Ray McCloud over the past 4 weeks has played at minimum 96.5% of snaps for the Falcons. He ran at least 28 routes in each of these weeks. He has no worse than an 86.1% route rate. The last 2 weeks, he's had 7 targets and 9 targets, 6 receptions in each of those games. I mean, he is a guy that is getting looks from Kirk Cousins right now. I mean, his expected fantasy points per game right now is 12 per game, which isn't great, but it puts him right on the line of a borderline wide receiver 4, which is a guy who in deeper leagues is definitely a flex player that you can put out there on a weekly basis and feel good about. So he's flex worthy, and surprisingly, he is on pace to knock on a 100 target season. Atlanta is running 2.22 plays per minute, which happens to be 4th in the league. They've ramped up that pass volume every game so far this season. Now, are we going to see a 58 pass attempt game for the Atlanta Falcons again this season? Probably not. Let's just call it and safely assume that we won't see another 58 attempt game. But like I said, he's had 7+ targets in 3 of 5 games so far this year. He's not getting deep, but every offense kind of just needs a safety valve guy, and Ray McCloud is becoming that guy for Kirk Cousins, doing a little bit after the catch, being productive, and he's just a guy that feels safe on your teams right now. And I like stashing a guy like that on your bench for those bye weeks that are coming up, where you just want some safe production that you can plug and play in your offenses on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I like that. It could be very interesting. Couple comments down here, Robert. So first of all, thank you for pulling. This is a great pull. Thank you for that. Last week's stash, Jordan Whittington or Jalen Polk. For me, if I'm stashing one of the two, I think I'm going with Jalen Polk. If I'm thinking more long term, whenever it comes to Jordan Whittington, like Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, neither of these guys are dealing with season-ending injuries. They're going to be back. And so Whittington, best case scenario, is going to be the third option in that offense, whereas I think that Jalen Polk could be the number one option for the New England Patriots. I thought that would end up being Javon Baker long-term, but he has made absolutely no impact at this point. And so, there's no reason at all to be excited about him or consider him. But is Polk the deep target? How much does that change from going from a sticks passer like Brissett as opposed to a quarterback that'll look for the deep ball like May? I think that that's a fair point as well. My answer for that is I don't think that there is a clear deep target. I mean, Kayshon Boutte over Chris, you'll love this. He's had a whopping 3 receptions the last 2 weeks, but he has the highest yards per target over the last 2 weeks. And then as far as what else was I looking at? The target percentage. I mean, it's been there for Jalen Polk for the most part. It's been there for Demario Douglas, but neither one of those guys are pushing the ball down the field. And that's where I thought Javon Baker would really succeed, is those fields. That's what he did in college. I mean, he stretched the shit out of the field. And so I really thought that, man, once Drake May starts, if Javon Baker can get on the field, their skill sets, I feel like line up so well. Where if you ignore Javon Baker and I'm ignoring Kayshon Boutte in my head, if that's even how you say his name, the gameplay has been Boutte for sure. But Demario Douglas, Hunter Henry, Jalen Polk, they're all short yardage reception type of guys. And so there's not that clear field stretcher for Drake May. So I think hopefully the Patriots are realizing this, and they're either getting somebody on the field, or they are, constructing the offense to where Jalen Polk guys like that, they can get open, and Drake May can take those easy completions. And especially against like his first start against Houston with how good their pass rush is, I think getting the ball out of Drake May's hands as fast as possible is the best option for them this week. And so that screams Jalen Polk and Hunter Henry, and Demario Douglas. Like, that's what they need to do. All those guys thrive in those short yardage situations. So I think it could be kind of messy as far as, that Drake May couldn't end up very well spreading the ball around. But if I had to guess, long-term, Jalen Polk is the guy. And I think Javon Baker is still the best deep threat on this team, but I don't know when we can expect to see him on the field. So it's really just like a team build standpoint that it's hard to feel too comfortable about any of these guys stretching the field that's seeing meaningful snaps right now.
Yeah, and Scampers is looking at it. He says Drake May won't have time to target deep.
Right.
He lost the center.
They're going to have to move quick. Have to.
Yeah. And before we get out of here, Robert Thomas does have another question for us. He said he wants our thoughts on Jalen Wright. He's sitting on the waiver wire on a bye, and he's real tempted to make him his last bench running back. Drew, go ahead and give us your Jalen Wright thoughts right now.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on who. If you like, do you have an open roster spot, or are you going to have to drop somebody for him? I mean, we've seen Mostert miss time. We've seen Jeff Wilson miss time. There really hasn't been a lot there for Jalen Wright, but I do think that he fits this scheme and the offense perfectly with what they want from their running back. So if you can afford to stash him, you can do much worse. But it all, the context really just depends on, like, who do you have to drop to make it happen.
Yeah, I would say if you have to drop anybody right now, I probably wouldn't do it either. If you're in a deeper league, then maybe so at that point. But I wouldn't imagine
he's definitely worth a stash in a deeper league.
Yeah, but I don't think he'd be on a waiver wire in a deeper league right now anyway. So, Drew, before we get out of here, go ahead, tell everyone where you can be found, what you're doing right now, how the Rams are treating you, how the Rams aren't treating you, just whatever, man. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to talk about everything but the Rams because that part has been miserable. But other than that, everything's been good. I mean, I'm here every Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern with Rhett, and then usually Nate as well. He had to miss tonight, but and then we've got a question that I want to get to in the chat as well. So I'll keep this short and sweet. But I'm at Twitter on Drew3MR, Fantasy and Frames on Twitter, the Fantasy and Frames website, all of our rankings, articles, things like that. Where there's waiver wire articles, there's plays and fades every week. There's our rankings every week. I mean, it's all there at the Fantasy and Frames website. So go to the Fantasy and Frames website, follow Fantasy and Frames on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Drew3MR. I think that pretty much hits it. Half PPR, I need to drop one. Spears or Ford? Holy, that is certainly a choice. Rhett, do you have between Spears and Ford? Do you have strong feelings on one or the other?
I mean, right now they're kind of both the same guy, right? I mean, we're waiting on Nick Chubb to make some miraculous comeback, and presumably
Tony Pollard's coming back from injury too, right?
Yeah. So, like, what are we really debating right now? Because I think you're looking at basically the same dude. Scampers also says he doesn't have the other backs, and he's not dropping Blake Corum.
Okay. I don't blame that. Corum finally saw some action this past week, so I don't blame you wanting to hold on to him for the upside. You got Tony Pollard in front of Spears, and then you've got Nick Chubb in front of Ford, it looks like he might possibly make his debut this week. We'll see. It hasn't been confirmed, but I think Jerome Ford, assuming Nick Chubb stays healthy the rest of the year, I mean, Jerome Ford is a pass catching downs back, change of pace guy at best, and that might be the case for Tyjae Spears as well. So I think with the injury history, I would hold on to Ford over Spears, but I can see why you're struggling with the decision. So his usage has been, and it's not going to get any easier with Chubb making his way back at least. So, I think I would personally go Ford over Spears, especially if I'm in any type of like full PPR league, which he said this was half PPR. So that makes it a little bit tougher.
Flip the coin. Just flip the coin and figure it out.
I'm going Ford, but yeah, it really is like a coin flip. I can see why you're struggling with the choice because it is tough. It is close.
Yeah. So once again, guys, we appreciate you hanging out with us tonight here on Fourth and Frames. We're here every Wednesday. We'll be back next Wednesday. Me, Drew, hopefully Nate with us as well, as we continue to try to give you actionable and league-winning advice for the rest of the 2024 season. I can be found on Twitter at rmanuelsports. Drew mentioned that he can be found on Twitter at Drew3MR. We will see you guys next week. And as we always sign off, toodles.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a